What's going on? We're back talking about one last final selection from this year's Final Girls Berlin Film Festival, and this one could be one of my favorite movies of the year. This one is called Here Before. Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to our content, we create content like what you're watching right now simply to educate and engage individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name's Captain Nostalgia. I have the pleasure of being a writer, podcaster, and events coordinator here. If you guys would like more information about what we do as a nonprofit, more podcasts, like what you guys see on this channel, more movie reviews like this, links to our social medias, where to find our podcasts, mental health resource library, and much more. All of those links are in the descriptions below. This movie is called Here Before, and it is the directorial debut from Stacey Gregg. She also wrote this movie. I'll talk about her in just a few minutes because I have a lot to say, but let's jump into a plot synopsis real quick. So this movie tells the story of a family that is stricken with grief after the death of their daughter, and a new family moves in next door, and mom takes a liking to the daughter because of the void in her, because of her own daughter's death, and some pretty strange things happen along the way. And again, as I've come to be my catchphrase, the less you know, the better this movie hits. Let's talk about this. At this point, I am pretty much on board with anything Andrea Riseborough wants to do as an actress. The past 5 years, this woman has messed me up, and the best way possible. These are some of her more recent films that she's done in the last few years, and she's incredible in both of these movies. But she's equally as incredible in this one. And one thing that I really like about this, and this is more about Gregg's script that I'll talk about in just a few minutes, is this movie doesn't depict the family that's grieving and the typical grieving way. So the one things that I think makes this story so refreshing is that it's not like this was a sudden death. This is not something that has stricken this family recently. They've kind of made peace with it, and they've been kind of removed for a few years. And I think that's a really refreshing aspect of the story that you don't see a whole lot of. Typically, if we're talking about grief is something that has happened or is currently happening to a character during the first act of the movie. And I think that what works really well in here is just the arc that Riseborough has throughout the course of this movie, to where she's able to be this very sympathetic woman in the beginning because of this tragic event that has befallen her. Words are hard to do sometimes. But you equally kind of get to see her reassure herself, which is really refreshing, because I think that there are a lot of things that Gregg allows this character to do throughout the course of it that we don't typically get to see from these types of movies. And through that, Riseborough really has not just a good performance, but a really well-rounded performance because of that. And that's something that I really enjoyed a lot about this film, is the fact that we get to see Riseborough be kind of a little bit on the chaotic side of things, but also at the same time, you also get to see her be a happy, carefree mother. You get to see her be a happy, carefree wife. And also you get to see her be a genuinely just grief-stricken individual that has had this tragedy befall her. I like the way that this character connects to the husband, but also to the other characters. There's a genuine connection and electricity that Riseborough has with each of these characters. It should be worth mentioning that Riseborough is also currently the mother of a teenage son as well, and she's happily married. With the neighbors feel genuine, you feel like you care, but you also feel like because you're doing life with someone, you're not afraid to get into the messiness of those relationships either. I know I've been talking about it thus far because it is the performances that do bring this film to life, but behind those performances lies just such a deep and moving script from Gregg. The fact that this is her like feature film debut is just mind-boggling to me. Like, this movie is ridiculously good. It has great character moments, great twists, to weave tension like a professional, like someone that has been doing this for like 10 to 20 years. And again, one of the things that I really enjoyed about this movie is the way that this isn't just a typical grief story, but you're seeing, or like supernatural, but you're seeing these events kind of take place at like removed, but also at the same time that there's a genuineness that is also here with these characters. I think sometimes when you're dealing with characters that are losing characters, whether it has taken place before the events of the film or within the first act of the film, you're kind of just focusing on the grief, and then that might be like a driving point for like revenge or like another plot motive, but you never get to see the characters kind of bounce back and see what life is like after all that happens. And there's so many things that I really find refreshing about Gregg's vision for Here Before. Namely that we don't see a lot of those tropes. I guess it's come to be understood that this is a family that has experienced this, and yes, this mother and this neighbor child are kind of experiencing this bond, and so it's bringing up all of these issues that, you know, you've kind of already put to bed. And then you have just the neighbor dynamic as well. There's so much about this story that just feels natural and genuine, that it's not just telling a story about grief and how characters are going through that grieving process and kind of dealing with something that doesn't feel natural. No, you're getting in dirty and getting to actually experience a lot of these emotions with these characters. And that said, the pacing of this movie is immaculate because like there's never a dry moment in this movie. This movie is literally only 83 minutes, and that includes credits. So you have to imagine that this movie's probably like 77 minutes actual like runtime, and this movie just moves at such such a steady pace that you're never bored, because there's always something that's making you dig into these characters' past and investing more time into them. I feel like sometimes we think that we need these like longer run times to tell these characters' stories, and that's not always the case. And it goes back to the old saying, quality over quantity. Like, I don't necessarily need a 2.5 hour movie about these two families, you know, because in the end there's just going to be a lot of unnecessary fat that's attached to it. Just here for 83 minutes, I'm literally getting to know all the information I have, the very little backstory that I need to know, but also how this tragedy is affecting not only the parents but also the son as well. Honestly, probably one of my favorite scenes in this movie. And I'm really excited about what Stacey Gregg is going to be doing next as a writer or director. This film places her on my radar. This film is incredible from start to finish. It is a moving thriller piece that is just dances so swimmingly in the pool of drama, and it weaves tension just so easily. Sorry, I'm trying to repeat myself without actually trying to repeat myself. I'm gonna jump into Rorschach rating scale. I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a 4 out of 5. I think this film is absolutely incredible. I highly recommend it. As of right now, I don't know of any streaming services that are going to be getting this film, but when it does, check our social medias. Links are going to be in the descriptions below. And when this movie drops, please give this movie a chance. Now it's time for Mental Health Moment. If you guys are new to our content, a Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health and we pull it out to examine it for just a few minutes in hopes that we will deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. 4 is filled with mental health topics that we can address, but honestly the one that I feel like would be best suited for this movie is understanding the length of grief. Let me explain. Sometimes we put grief into this circumstantial thing where it's being like, all right, I'm gonna be sad for a couple months, maybe at most a couple of years. The thing about grief is that grief is something that can quite literally just trigger you. It can be imagery, it can be smells, it can be a word, it can be like just something little, and you can kind of unravel that, and it's okay. That is completely okay. And I think we get to see that with Riseborough's character in here. Here you have a character that's pretty confident that she's gotten back to a place in her life where she's not sad about her daughter being dead anymore. She's made peace with it at the very least. And here you have a girl that is kind of like almost a constant reminder of the very thing that she's lost. Sequences within this film that take place between Riseborough and her on-screen husband, where they acknowledge the fact that yes, like this was really hard on us, but you kind of going through this is kind of reopening up this process again. It just goes to show that like you can be okay, but yet there are still things that are going to remind you of the people that you've lost. And grief is really interesting to talk about because it's never a one-size-fits-all thing. What may work for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. A couple months ago, while we were recording an episode of Biscazing, my co-host Mark and I, we got talking about grief. In that episode specifically, he shared how his process for processing death was a lot different than my own. If I'm really close to an individual, like it hits me really hard, and it's kind of a process to where I have to make peace with the fact that this is a person that I had in my life that's no longer in my life. On the other hand, is just completely acknowledges the fact and just kind of goes on and does life because he's weird. That's what his words, not mine. Again, I use that example to illustrate the two things, that grief is something that is going to affect us all differently, and we need to understand and be on guard that grief is something that is just like a wound that can reopen itself. And so if you're going through that situation where you've recently gone through it, or you know someone that has, you're not alone. It's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to have those times. I want to also direct your attention to our mental health resource library in the descriptions below. If you guys are watching this on IGTV, click the link in the descriptions. And yeah, on that note, that's going to do it for us on this episode. We'll be back in a couple of days talking about the new rom-com Marry Me. What's up? We're back with another film festival. This is the first of two films we're going to be covering from this year's Final Girls Film Festival, and this one is called Knocking. Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to our content, we create content like what you're watching right now, simply to educate and engage individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia. I have the privilege of being one of the writers on staff here, podcasters, the event coordinator, and more. If you guys would like more information about what we do as a nonprofit, more podcasts, more movie reviews like what you guys are watching right now, links to our social media, Patreon, and more, all of those are going to be in the show notes below. Before I start, there's good news for you guys. If you guys are intrigued about what I'm going to be talking about in this review, you guys can actually check out Knocking when it comes to Shudder beginning Valentine's Day. Alright, so let's jump into this. Knocking tells the story of a woman who is recently released from a psychiatric hospital, and she moves into a new place. Who doesn't love new beginnings? And in the process of this moving in, she begins to hear a mysterious knocking, and eventually she ends up kind of having another nervous breakdown around these mysterious knocks. I'm going to say that the performances in this are done really well, but there's a lot about this movie that just feels a little bit too familiar. I want to be sure to give the actors the credit that they deserve, and this is a foreign film, so if I do end up butchering some of the names and the stars and crew of said film, end up coming across this YouTube channel that's super tiny somehow. First off, thanks for watching. Second, I'm really sorry. I'm notoriously bad at names. Our protagonist's name is Molly in the film, and she is played wonderfully by Cecilia Mayo. Probably butchered that name. Super sorry. What I love so much about her performance is there's just this raw, just commitment. Like she transforms and into this. I think a film like Knocking is really easy to just write off as this woman is crazy. Like there is nothing here of what she is claiming, and therefore everything around her must be crazy. But this movie actually treats her like a character attempting to come back into society, and I really valued that. As a cinephile or a viewer, but also as a mental health advocate. Sometimes we have this tendency to look at the people's past and judge them for their past instead of acknowledging them as individuals and able to kind of see them make a new path for themselves despite their past. And Knocking shares that sentiment, and that's something that I really, really valued a lot about this film. And I appreciate it for twofold. First, it doesn't just outright give you Molly's story. Molly's story, one thing that is really intriguing about it is that yes, she hears these knocks that could in fact be coming to fruition, but the difference is that you learn of her past through a series of flashbacks and you explore this traumatic event that happened to her. That's really key in making the character empathetic, but also at the same time to keep the audience engaged. And this is one of the things for somewhat as lackluster as this film can be at times, and I want to emphasize that, lackluster at times, because this movie does drag. I will say that those parts of the movie invested me into the character and into the story. Two, the second reason why I feel like this film really works with that notion is it allows Cecilia as an actress to be able to truly bring a level of range as an actress, but also to make Molly feel like a full-fledged character, not just another Carbon, write him off, she's crazy kind of thing that we've seen so many times in popular culture. The performance that Lucio gives in this is incredible. Like, to say that she is committed would be an understatement. There are so many times where I just found myself really rooting for this character, that I found myself uncomfortable because of the decisions this character is making. But also at the same time, there are just really scenes, especially in the climax of this movie, where it just drew me to the edge because she believes and she's so committed in all of this. All of that to say, and I'm trying to like stay as far away from spoilers as possible, but all of that to say, she delivers a top tier performance. The pacing of this movie is really interesting to consider because for one, it really ends up being this kind of really slow burn to begin with, and once the knocking portion of the story actually begins, the film kind of slowly starts to pick up the pace, but then somehow kind of finds itself at this like snail crawl pace again before digging into this like faster pace. I don't really know how to describe it. It's kind of uneven, and it's kind of pacing wise, it's kind of all over the place. And sometimes it's really difficult to do that with non-linear storytelling, which this movie is all about, because you're finding out her backstory through a series of flashbacks, but also at the same time you're also living this recovery process with the character. It's a very tightrope to walk, and sometimes it works really well and other times it doesn't. And the times where it doesn't work well, like the story drags, and I want to emphasize, when it drags, it drags. I find myself with this catch-22 because I like this. I like the fact that the story is non-linear storytelling because it works better for the character and for the story that the filmmakers are trying to tell. But also at the same time, it also creates these really low points for the storytelling and for the narrative. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and give this one on a Rorschach rating scale a 3 out of 5. Like I said, I think this movie is done extraordinarily well. I didn't even get into like the technicalities of this film. It is terrific cinematography. The score is wonderful. Performances are great. The pacing is literally all over the place. And in that pacing issues, you also have these really dry lulls that you're just waiting for the next high. Like I said, you can check out Knocking when it hits on February 14th on Shudder. Let's go ahead and get into our mental health moment. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I kind of want to expand upon it in just a little bit. You guys that are new to our content, mental health moment is where we examine a theme of mental health and we pull out and we just talk about it for a few minutes in hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. And honestly, this is one that strikes really close to home for me because I grew up in a fairly conservative Christian household. I've talked about it several times on the Victims and Villains podcast and Abyss Gazing both. And I've clearly not stayed in touch with those conservative roots outside of also being a Christian. Yeah, in case you didn't get my what I was going for, I got told all the time. Every new tattoo I got, it was another can of worms talking about how because I have tattoos, I'm going to hell. And honestly, that really messed up my mental health for a long period of time. Simultaneously, I'm telling this story because Molly's, the deeper into the film we go with Molly and the more people learn about her past, the more you can kind of feel that people are only seeing her for her past instead of here is a woman that once was broken and is now attempting to put the pieces of her life back together. A really deep theme that's woven throughout the course of this film, and that's actually whether you like this movie or you don't, whether you like horror or you don't, take this if you learn nothing else in this video and learn that people are not just their past. And if you're going through depression right now, if you're going through suicidal tendencies or self-harm or addiction or whatever that may be, you are not your past. We all fall. We all mess up. We all have terrible skeletons in our closets. Some of us have more than others. Some of us have worse than others. But that doesn't determine our value as a human being. And it doesn't determine our value as a person trying to distance themselves, because people can change, but also at the same time people can forge themselves and find redemption. We see constant movies that are made telling and depicting the story of the underdog finding success because, well, they're forging ahead. You're not the worst thing you've ever done. And so it's really tricky to kind of close out this video because, I feel like so much of my own process was learning my identity and who I was. And so I just want to encourage everyone with that too, is to understand that you're not the worst thing, but also emphasize the importance of understanding identity and understanding who you are as an individual and being happy and at peace with who you are as a human being. And I just want to throw this out there. If you need anyone, all of our contact links along with our mental health resource library are in the show notes below. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be back in just a couple of days talking about another selection from this film festival. If you guys would like more information about the Final Girls Berlin Film Festival, links are in the descriptions below. Thank you guys for watching.